Welcome to the Freight Project podcast, brought to you by Ceresis, a North American third-party logistics company providing shippers transportation management, technology, and solutions.
On today's The Freight Project podcast episode, I welcome Ruthie Bowles, founder of content marketing company Defy The Status Quo. In the episode, you'll get to know about Ruthie's background in the Army and how her interest in writing led her to a career in content marketing, focusing on the supply chain. Ruthie is on the podcast today to talk about Amazon's new foray into being seen as a competitor with logistics services providers like carriers and fulfillment companies, and how that will impact shippers and the industry at large. We hope you enjoy this episode of the Freight Project podcast. Well, hello, Ruthie, and thank you for coming on as a guest for the Freight Project podcast. With all of our first-time guests, we want to make sure our listeners know who you are and your background. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how your background experience has shaped where you are in your career today?
Well, Adam, I'm really happy to be here, and I served in the Army for about 8.5 years, and that pretty much shaped most of my life to this point. Most of my career, I was a translator and an intelligence analyst, so that had me doing a lot of team management, analysis, and a lot of professional writing. After I got out of the Army, I spent some time as a government contractor, and I decided that I, wasn't suited for me anymore. And I decided to blend my love of writing with entrepreneurship and started my own business. Because I realized that besides book writing and waiting for your book to be published, there weren't a whole lot of ways to make money writing unless you tied it to marketing. So I wanted my writing business to be successful. And so that was the direction I started to look. I know that people talk a lot about what they call content shock, like there's just too much content out there and that nobody can read all of it. And that is true. But I don't believe that content marketing is even close to being dead, and especially not in the B2B sector. Currently I specialize in developing strategy and content for B2B service companies, like many of the companies in the supply chain space. So now I'm growing a content marketing company called Defy The Status Quo to provide the sort of value first content that my clients need to stand out online and generate more business.
Well, very cool. Well, I hope content marketing's not dead, because that would be my entire job. That's what we're doing here right now, right? So,
and you guys do a fantastic job.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And I think really what you're saying is obviously content's evolving. We're here on the podcast today. That's a different kind of content than just, written word. And there is a lot out there, but I think you're right. When you're in the supply chain space, one, if you didn't come from that originally, and that wasn't me for sure. And it sounds like you had a little bit of logistics and, people management with your experience in the Army, but, I just sort of fell in love with it myself. And, the reason that we have you on the podcast today is that you and I, connected on LinkedIn around content. And I think naturally you, like myself, must have been very attracted to the supply chain space, probably because there's a lot of problem solving, right? And so you contributed, recently with your great writing skills and just your love of the supply chain, a really great piece to the Ceresis blog about Amazon's, thinking about insourcing, right? And there's been a lot of rumors that have been quite prevalent in the logistics industry really for a long time, but have really ratcheted up in the last year, that Amazon is really looking to reduce using outside partners, like working with carriers, and they might use their own fleet, or, third-party warehouse and fulfillment shops, or they may actually do it themselves for their customers as well. And so some of the big carriers are starting to look at Amazon as a competitor. People are always looking at what Amazon is doing. And so I encourage everybody to go and read that blog post by Ruthie. I'll make sure there's a link on this podcast page when this is published. But you mentioned in that article something pretty important, that it's frankly about, money, it seems like. You said that Amazon spends about 15 times more today on shipping than it did just 10 years ago. It seems that, not even Amazon was immune to the increased costs that the industry saw in 2018. So why do you think Amazon shipping costs rose so much that it's driving them to consider insourcing more of their logistics processes?
Basically, I think it boils down to customer expectations. When Amazon launched the Prime program and brought free 2-day shipping to us, it wasn't even on our radar for the average consumer. So at first it was really exciting and it was really new. And if we didn't get free 2-day shipping with another retailer or another supplier, then that was okay. Because we kind of expected, 2-day shipping to just be like really awesome. But now, especially if you are an Amazon Prime member, and oftentimes, even if you're not, you still expect to get that really fast shipping, and you often expect for it to be free. In I think it was one of the most recent Freight Project podcast episodes. I'm not sure if it's the most recent one, but your national sales manager gave estimated numbers for Prime members at 70 or 80 million. So with 70 or 80 million accounts, and these people probably order multiple times a week, they expect fast shipping. What ended up happening was that instead of it being nice to have, it became a must have. So Amazon turned a differentiating factor for them into a standard. So now we don't want to go without free 2-day shipping, or, in some cases now, same-day shipping, depending on where you live. So because now that's the standard, the cost of that has now gone up. So Amazon's looking at insourcing more of their logistics processes because they usually can do it at the same cost or at even better rates. And their chief financial officer said it's because they have more accurate data. So, and you consider too that companies that work together on, in a supply chain, they, often don't feel comfortable sharing all of their data, right? And with good reason. But if Amazon insources the entire process, then the data is free flow.
Oh, yeah.
So, and they have the infrastructure to support that and get out the most accurate information in a timely way.
Well, and dang you, Amazon, but thank you, Amazon, right? Sometimes
exactly.
Sometimes disruption is important. And I know, coming from really the marketing side and then moving into the supply chain space, I always, tried to understand why supply chain hadn't been more fully disrupted. And one, it's such an important thing for every company to master. And so change might be really hard because if things are going well, then it's tough to make a change, right? It's easy to stay in the status quo. No pun intended with your own company, Defy The Status Quo. But at the end of the day, without Amazon, perhaps we wouldn't be having a supply chain that continues to get more efficient, wouldn't have a supply chain that is now focused on using technology to get more data, that's focused more ultimately, and this is a good thing for all of us as consumers, on the customer. So who knows what the future holds? And although Amazon may be a pain in the butt and has a large effect on our marketplace, we might come to say, well, without Amazon, would we be where we're at today? Right? So not a bad thing. And that's a really important. And those who have the data and can do more are with less because of that data and make really smart decisions like Amazon, they're the ones that are going to survive. Right? So
absolutely.
Speaking of the future and money and those kinds of things, some economists are predicting somewhat of a recession in 2020. We've had a really long bull run for over 10 years. And so I think maybe either it's a good prediction or maybe people are like, it's got to, stop someday. But typically the freight market itself starts to see a lull in demand a little bit sooner than the rest of the economy. In your conversations, as you're creating all the supply chain content for clients and working in the supply chain with those customers, with drivers, carriers, shippers, and all entities, are you hearing the same thing? Will shippers be in a stronger position to demand more from carriers? What does the freight market look like towards the end of this year going into 2020?
Well, based on what I've heard and read, I think that shippers might be in a better position come 2020. I mean, really, right now, the carrier capacity is finite. And, despite the fact that they've ordered trucks and other types of transportation, those things take time to deliver. And actually, you and I just talked about it a little bit on LinkedIn about the driver issue that's also currently plaguing the industry. So right now, shippers seem to be in a position where if they want their freight moved, they have to take what they can get because the demand is so high. In thinking about a 2020 recession, I think we'd probably be jumping the gun a little bit to make too serious of a prediction. And I mean, even the analysts who have been making that prediction are reminding people that that's exactly what it is. It is a prediction. Because you have to consider, how surprised many people were by the outcome of the 2016 election, and 2020 is an election year. And either way, it has a huge impact on our economy and international relations because the global economy is going to be waiting with bated breath, I'm sure, to kind of see how it plays out on our end. So I think it's probably wiser for those of us without all of the knowledge of the economy to kind of wait for the smoke to clear, as it were. But we can count on the fact that the pendulum always swings back. It's just a little harder to be specific right now, especially with the kind of current social and political environment that we're experiencing. The growth may be moderate in 2019, but I really think that the political events are going to have a serious impact on the industry in 2020 and 2021. And like I said, after 2016, I'd have to be, ridiculous to try and predict it ahead of time.
Well, and I think that just really makes it obvious that shippers and supply chain entities maybe need to focus on what they themselves can control. And it's their own processes and their own investments and their own initiatives. And they can make an impact there. Because as we're wrapping, this conversation around Amazon, yes, the economy comes into play for shippers, whether it's boosting up inventories ahead of possible tariffs. And that's what we saw last year, really impacted the industry. And if you didn't have a really sound process in place or to respond to any market force, you're going to easily get disrupted. And it sure doesn't sound like Amazon's scared to compete and disrupt no matter the market. And they've been doing it for 20 plus years. And that all the way back in their founding days, I think they just wanted to disrupt the book market. I think Jeff Bezos had bigger ambitions beyond books, but he started with just books and, cue the violin playing for the Barnes and Nobles of the world that struggle thanks to that. But do you think Amazon will put a dent into the big logistics service providers just like they did the bookstores? Why or why not?
I really think that they could eventually if they wanted to. And I think that that is the big key right there, if they want to. I actually just read an article about Amazon Business, which used to be called Amazon Supply. And I believe they renamed it about 7 years ago, but it's Amazon's B2B arm. And Bank of America issued a note estimating that Amazon Business could capture up to 10% of America's B2B market. And it's really just now starting to get started. The biggest thing to remember about Amazon is, like you said, they're disruptive. They're always looking to disrupt things. They disrupt industries. They disrupt other companies. They even disrupt themselves, like we talked about with the 2-day shipping, how, first it was good and then it wasn't so good for them, but they disrupt themselves and they're always looking to do more. Amazon's cloud service was born from an internal need that they satisfied for themselves, and then they realized that it could be an external service. If Amazon sees an industry that they can profitably enter, then I think that they will. Now, we've heard certain things, from the official statements from UPS and FedEx saying that, UPS and FedEx are going to be fine because they offer different types of B2B services that Amazon doesn't offer. But the B2B market has the potential to be twice as large as the retail market in, these supply chain type industries. And Amazon is always looking to grow. And B2B anything really seems to be the place to do it. And again, they've started with themselves. So I actually wrote this in the article on the Cerasis blog, but in 2013, UPS satisfied almost 50% of Amazon's shipping needs. I think it was like exactly 48 or 49%. But in 2018, they were down to just 22%. Amazon internally took care of 26% of what they used to outsource. In terms of FedEx, it was 9% in 2013, and then it was just down to, I think, 3% in 2018. So they're using themselves as a test case. And I mean, that's perfect, because if it doesn't work out, then they can, cut their losses quickly and move on. But if it does work, then they've, used themselves as a test case and perfected it before they present this finished, service, if you will, to the market.
Yeah. So it clearly looks like when you go from 50 to 22 with 26% taken on by Amazon themselves, that they're truly testing out how to do this. And, as we're looking at that insourcing and their impact on those carriers like FedEx and UPS and some others, there was a story about pulling back from XPO recently that Amazon did. How will it impact other shippers, though? I mean, is there any play there? Will it free up more capacity, since Amazon's running their own game? Or will Amazon get so efficient at the customer's experience around shipping, like they did with Amazon Prime and soon delivery robots, that shippers will need to double down on getting better at shipping? That not only includes reducing cost of shipping, but also focusing on how customers' experience will impact shipping process changes for shippers. What do you think about that?
Really, if you're not focusing on the customer experience in all of your operations, that's probably going to have your company go through a rough time until you do start to focus on the customer experience. One of the key shifts for Amazon is that they can satisfy their shipping needs for the same costs or cheaper in some cases. And they, like I said, they cite their more accurate data. So for Amazon, it's all about efficiency. So even if Amazon's efforts at logistics doesn't directly impact customer expectations, they're still creating a larger profit margin for themselves. Businesses have to be as lean as possible in order to compete in today's environment. And Amazon is this, behemoth of a company that has a lot more money to toss around. So small, medium, and even larger size companies are still, even large size companies can be considered small when you compare them to Amazon. They're struggling to compete with those resources. So they have to differentiate themselves in other ways. So a good example would probably be, again, focusing on the customer experience and customer expectations. I recently purchased some fair trade and organic tea from Arbor Teas. It's the name of the company. Couldn't find it on Amazon. I saw they had organic and fair trade teas on Amazon, but I wasn't really happy with what I saw there. So I started, I went out online, besides Amazon, to find a company that made me happy. So Arbor Teas didn't offer free shipping, but the shipping wasn't a lot. And their websites effectively communicated their big marketing why, their mission, how they were giving back to the people who grew those teas and harvested them. And so because that appealed to my conscience, my consumer conscience, if you will, I was happier to wait a little bit longer than 2 days, to receive my tea. And it was because of that differentiating factor. And that's something that Arbor Teas was able to do for me that Amazon, as a larger company, was not. And once the packages arrived, I got to read about the company. And one of the things that really blew me away was that I got a handwritten note inside. It was just my name, a couple of lines, and the signature. So I even remember the name of the person who signed my box. And it just completely blew me away. And this is the sort of differentiation that all companies need to look at. Instead of reacting to Amazon, they need to also take a look at themselves. They're not going to do as well if they only look to react to what Amazon is doing, because they are not Amazon. So they have to look at what's different about themselves that they can use to their advantage. So if they aren't doing everything, and on top of that, if they aren't doing everything they can to reduce costs in any area of their business, then that's money that they're leaving on the table. So internal cost reduction isn't money you necessarily have to compete for. So when you don't reduce those costs, that's just money you've decided, not to have, basically.
Yeah, so this really dovetails into my next thought and kind of the point I made earlier. It looks like Amazon is, in fact, making the industry, retailers, B2B folks, continue to find ways to improve and stand out. With your knowledge of logistics as a writer in the industry, what would you offer as sort of low-hanging fruit? I mean, that previous example was a good one, but it entails a lot of strategy, right? But what are maybe low-hanging fruit for shippers or maybe even logistics service providers to compete against Amazon's experience and their encroach on the industry?
I really think it ties back to what you can offer as a smaller than Amazon type of business. People will buy from Amazon and they like to continue to do so. It's, probably a fact of life now, but people are looking for reasons to shop elsewhere, whether you're B2C or B2B, right? So like in this case, we're largely focusing on B2B, but lots of people are looking for reasons to shop elsewhere, and younger generations like knowing that the way that they spend their money has an impact. So we're looking now as, the millennials or exennials or, whatever name you want to call them, they're starting to move now into those decision-making positions. So those will be, these will be the generations that are starting to make those decisions now as well. And I believe they call it conscious consumerism. And so they want to know that the way they spend their money has an impact. And so like for me, like I said, I have an Amazon household, but when I find other companies that I can support, I like to do so. And it's normally because they've effectively, communicated a message to me. Because in this day and age, looking from a marketing standpoint, it's not just how you present your company, but how you actually are as a company. Your marketing channels are an opportunity for you to present your company the way that you want to be seen. But if you want to continue being seen that way, then you have to make sure that you're being honest, because the power of social media means that if you're presenting your company one way and an employee, shares alternate facts, then, that can kind of bring it all crashing down on you. As a kind of easy example, I just saw a vegan YouTuber who got caught eating fish, and somebody put that on YouTube, and now her YouTube channel's crashing.
Oh my,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, so it's something like that these days, where people don't really, they don't hold back anymore. And if they can put it out there, then oftentimes they will. So the low-hanging fruit is basically just to get clear on your message and to communicate it in every single aspect of your business, internal and external. So I go through a lot of supply chain related content every day online. And when you get to a company website, most of the time they're vague. They don't seem to be completely clear on their message. And what happens then is that you just blend in. You don't stand out, you blend in. And blending in is, in this age, like we talked about, of a lot of content online and everybody's got a website, it's probably the worst thing that you can do. So instead, what you want to do is stand out from the noise with a clear message that your customers and your employees can latch onto. It's a great time to, for supply chain companies to get into something like content marketing, and even starting out easy, like, redoing their website, right? That's relatively easy compared to, committing to an ongoing content marketing strategy. But even redoing your website, so that way you are communicating effectively from your homepage to all the other pages for those people who are researching you and your company before potentially contacting you about, a business arrangement. You can stand out from other companies who have yet to reach that step, because most of the content out there is subpar. And so, that's kind of the line of thinking that I was following when I named my company, because the status quo is poor content in most B2B industries and, the boring industries. But I say this to a lot of people, but whatever, the service or product that you provide, it's not boring to the people who need it. You just have to communicate effectively to make that connection with them. So yeah, get clear on your message, and low-hanging fruit would probably be making sure that your website effectively communicates a message.
Absolutely. And make it about the customer, right? Not necessarily all about you.
Absolutely.
Provide value.
Yes, benefits, not features.
That's right. And I know when we redid our website, one of our core things is the first thing we wanted to say to them was, we understand you have a problem. We empathize. We've been there ourselves, and we now have solutions, and we can do that for you too. And our sales process is all about, education and consultative solution selling. We want to listen to their issues. And if we can align with our services and products to solve those things, we want to market ourselves in that same way. So I think it's all about being yourself, not being afraid to stand on your soapbox and say, we're good at this. And if you have this problem, we have that solution, and you're at the center of that. And it's also okay sometimes to say, we're maybe not the best fit for that. And yeah, Amazon might be a good solution. So I do see the point you made about differentiating yourself, maybe even specializing, and being okay that you can't be everything to everyone, and that Amazon can be seen as a commodity and sort of just a way of life. And the way to stand out is to not make yourself that commodity either, and make yourself valuable. And I know you're doing that and trying to make a difference in supply chain content. I know us at Ceresys welcomes that, because when we started 7 years ago, it was as simple as just one blog per day. We've not stopped since then. We've improved and we've built this community. And I think if we can all work together and, educate ourselves and lean on our value, then we can all defy the status quo. So where can our listeners find out more about your company, Ruthie, and reach out to you if they have content marketing needs?
And that is my URL, defythestatusquo.com. So
that's a pretty cool URL. Well, cool. We'll add a link to it as well on this podcast published page. Want to thank you again, Ruthie, for being on the Freight Project podcast. Hope to have you again down in the future. And for all the listeners, thank you as always for listening.